Crash landing on Vidia. The brilliant emerald flash of emergency thrusters cut through Vidia's perpetual blizzard as Cash's research vessel spiraled toward the planet's unforgiving surface. Metal screamed against ice as the ship carved a devastating trench through the frozen landscape, finally coming to rest in a shower of sparks and debris. Critical systems failure. Hull integrity compromised. Oxygen reserves at 67%, Aura announced with mechanical calm while warning lights painted the cockpit crimson. "Tell me something I don't know," Cash growled, his fingers dancing across emergency controls. Blood from a gash above his eye froze almost instantly in the rapidly cooling cabin. The xenobiology expedition to Vidia had been controversial from the start. The planet was officially classified as uninhabitable, but Cash had built his career on proving conventional wisdom wrong. Outside, Vidia's atmosphere hit him like a physical blow when he forced open the emergency hatch. Wind-driven ice crystals stung his face despite his thermal suit's protection. The emergency shelter deployed with a pneumatic hiss, its self-assembling framework the only thing standing between him and certain death in temperatures that could freeze human blood in minutes. 20 meters from the main wreckage, his scanner detected something impossible, a heat signature emanating from a nearby ice formation. Cash's hand moved instinctively to the molecular blade at his hip. Vidia wasn't supposed to support complex life forms. The ice formation revealed itself as a small cave. Tracks in the snow led inside, not animal, but not quite human either. Against every protocol he'd ever learned, Cash followed them into the darkness. She lay curled against the back wall, her blue skin almost translucent against the ice. Snow-white hair spilled across her shoulders, and her eyes, luminous gold with vertical pupils, dilated as his light fell upon her. The diamond-shaped marking between her brows pulsed with its own inner light. "Impossible," he breathed, scientific training momentarily forgotten. She hissed, scrambling backward until pressed against the ice wall. Her body trembled violently, lips tinged with a deeper blue that Cash recognized as hypothermia, or whatever the equivalent was for her species. "I'm here to help," he said, removing his outer glove to show her his 5-fingered hand. "You're freezing." "Stay away, human," she managed through chattering teeth, her accent musical despite her distress. "Your kind not welcome here." Her knowledge of humans meant there had been prior contact, despite official records stating otherwise. More importantly, she was clearly suffering from extreme cold, strange for a species that should have evolved to survive on an ice planet. "Banished," she whispered, her golden eyes dimming. "Can't return." Cold weak. Understanding dawned. She was an outcast, apparently unable to withstand temperatures her people had adapted to. A violent shiver racked her body, and Cash made his decision. Scientific discovery could wait, survival came first. "I'm Cash," he said, moving closer carefully. "I don't care why you're out here alone, but neither of us will survive long in these temperatures. My shelter has heat. Real heat." Her eyes widened with desperate longing before suspicion returned. "What payment?" "Information," Cash replied honestly. "I need to know how to survive here until I can repair my ship." "You need warmth." Simple exchange. Finally, she nodded once. "Efiera," she said, placing a blue hand against her chest. The journey back to the shelter was arduous, with Efiera growing weaker with each step. By the time the thermal barrier came into view, she was barely conscious. Cash half-carried her through the energy field that kept warmth in and killing cold out. As heat flooded the small space, Efiera's eyes fluttered open, her expression transforming from pain to wonder. She stretched trembling fingers toward the heating unit as if to capture every particle of warmth. "This is forbidden magic," she whispered in awe. Cash smiled. "Not magic, technology. And right now, it's going to keep us both alive." Her golden eyes locked with his, vulnerability and cautious hope replacing earlier suspicion. "Why help me? Your kind seeks only conquest." Cash frowned, wondering what encounter had given her this impression. "My kind is curious, sometimes reckless." But I'm just a scientist studying life forms. And right now, you're the most fascinating life form I've ever encountered. As Efiera drifted into exhausted sleep, Cash studied her with growing excitement. He had come to Vidia seeking new discoveries. Instead, it seemed discovery had found him. Shared warmth and ancient wounds. Morning arrived with no discernible change in Vidia's perpetual twilight. Cash had been awake for hours, cataloging damage to his ship's systems while Efiera slept. Her body, so rigid with cold when he'd found her, had gradually relaxed in the shelter's warmth. Temperature inside shelter maintaining at 22 degrees Celsius, Aura reported. External temperature remains at -47 degrees Celsius. Power reserves at 36%. Cash rubbed his stubbled jaw. At current consumption rate, they had maybe 3 days before the heating system failed. He glanced at Efiera as she began to stir, the diamond marking on her forehead pulsing more vibrantly than before. "You've never felt this before, have you?" Cash asked as her golden eyes opened. "Real warmth?" Efiera sat up slowly, wonder still etched on her features. "My people, we generate internal heat. Enough to survive, not enough to feel." She paused, searching for the word. "Comfort." "Yet you can't," Cash observed, offering her a ration pack. She accepted the food warily, sniffing before taking a small bite. "Born wrong. Defective. The elders say my internal fire is weak." Her voice hardened. "Kelvik said I would bring weakness to our bloodlines." "Kelvik? First hunter. He was to be my mate before the cold sickness proved my defect." She looked away. "Domius, our leader, showed mercy. Banishment instead of culling." "Some mercy," Cash muttered. He turned to his equipment, pulling out a small metal disc. "This is a personal thermal regulator. We use them for deep space excursions." He demonstrated, placing it against his forearm where it adhered. "It creates a microfield of controlled heat." Efiera's eyes widened as he programmed the device. "Your technology might keep you alive," he finished, offering it to her. "May I?" She hesitated before nodding. Cash gently placed the disc at the base of her throat where he'd noted a concentration of those pulsing vein-like patterns. The moment it activated, Efiera gasped, her back arching as warmth spread throughout her body. "By the ancient fires," she whispered, her voice trembling. Her hand flew to the disc, not to remove it, but to feel it with wondering fingers. This is." Cash watched, fascinated by the intensity of her reaction. The blue flush returned to her cheeks, spreading down her neck, and her pupils dilated until her eyes were almost entirely black. "Too much?" he asked, reaching to adjust the settings. "No," she exclaimed, catching his hand with surprising strength. "Please don't take it away." Their eyes locked, and Cash became acutely aware of the smoothness of her skin beneath his fingertips, cool but rapidly warming. He cleared his throat and withdrew his hand. "I need to salvage parts from my ship to repair the communication array," he said, turning to his equipment. "But first, I need to understand this environment better. The storms, safe routes, any predators." Efiera seemed to collect herself, adjusting to the new sensation of consistent warmth. "The ice wolves hunt at dusk. The shifting fields lie to the north, unstable ice that breaks without warning." She hesitated. "I can show you safe paths if I share more technology." Cash guessed. "If you teach me," she corrected, "about your world. Your warmth." Her gaze intensified. "Our tribes speak of humans as weak creatures who hide behind machines, unable to survive the true cold. Yet you survive. You create heat itself." Cash smiled slightly. "We're adaptable. That's our strength." He gestured toward his damaged ship, visible through the shelter's translucent wall. "Though sometimes we're too confident." Efiera rose gracefully, moving with new vitality now that she wasn't fighting the cold. "We begin now." The storm passes soon. Within an hour, they ventured outside. Despite the thermal regulator, Fiera wrapped herself in additional insulating materials Cash had provided. He carried tools and scanning equipment, documenting everything for his research as they worked. "Your people," he asked as they approached the crash site, "they know about humans but avoid contact." The first contact was. She paused, considering her words carefully, "not peaceful." 3 generations passed, human explorers came. They took samples, tried to establish a base, melted a sacred ice field with their machines. Her expression darkened. 13 warriors died driving them away. Cash winced. Early interstellar exploration had sometimes prioritized scientific discovery over diplomatic caution. "I'm sorry. You are different," she observed, studying him. "You ask. You listen. That's how science should work," he replied, kneeling to examine a damaged component. "Understanding, not imposing." They worked through the dim Vidian day, Cash harvesting salvageable parts while Fiera kept watch for predators. When she detected danger approaching, her hearing far more acute than his, they retreated to higher ground, watching as serpentine creatures with multiple legs slithered through their tracks. "Ice vipers," she explained. "They sense body heat through the ground." By the time they returned to the shelter, Cash's arms were full of salvage technology and his mind brimming with new information about Vidia's ecosystem. But as he activated the partially repaired communication array, a troubling thought occurred to him. What would happen to Fiera when his rescue arrived? Trust and betrayal. The communication array crackled to life on the second day, its makeshift repairs holding just long enough to establish contact with the orbital research station. Cash kept the transmission brief: coordinates, status, request for extraction. He deliberately omitted any mention of Fiera. "Why didn't you tell them about me?" she asked, having listened intently to every word of the exchange. Cash powered down the array, conserving what little energy remained. "Because I know my people. They'd want to study you, catalog you, maybe take you back to human space." He met her golden gaze. "You're not a specimen." Something shifted in Fiera's expression, a wall lowering that he hadn't even realized was there. "The thermal regulator," she said quietly, touching the device at her throat. "It's not just keeping me warm, is it? You're studying my physiology." Cash felt heat rise in his cheeks. She was right, the device was collecting biometric data, feeding information to his portable research unit. "Yes," he admitted. "But not to exploit you. To understand why you can't generate heat like your people." And he pulled up the data on his scanner, turning the screen so she could see the readings. "Your cellular structure is identical to what I'd expect from a cold-adapted species. But there's something else, a genetic marker that suggests your ancestors weren't originally from Vidia." Fiera's pupils dilated, the diamond marking on her forehead pulsing more rapidly. "What do you mean?" "I think your people are refugees. Survivors who adapted to this world over generations. But you're a throwback. Your genetics remember a warmer world." Before Fiera could respond, a distant sound reached them through the shelter walls, the distinctive whine of approaching aircraft. Cash checked his chronometer. The rescue ship was early. "They're here," he said, reaching for his emergency beacon. "Wait." Fiera's hand closed over his, stopping him. "If what you say is true, about my ancestors, then I am not defective. I am original." "Exactly. But Fiera, if they see you." The aircraft's engines grew louder, circling the crash site. Through the shelter's translucent walls, they could see lights sweeping across the snow. Cash made a decision that would haunt him later. He activated the beacon. "Stay hidden," he told Fiera urgently. "Let me handle this." She nodded, moving to the back of the shelter and wrapping herself in thermal blankets to mask her heat signature. Cash stepped outside as the rescue shuttle touched down, its thermal wash melting snow in a wide circle. Captain Torres emerged first, followed by 2 other crew members. Cash. Good to see you alive. We picked up some interesting readings from orbit, unusual heat signatures in this area. Just my emergency systems, Cash replied, forcing casualness into his voice. The shelter's been running hot to keep me alive. Torres nodded, but his scanner operator was frowning at his readings. Captain, I'm detecting 2 distinct biosignatures. One human, one unknown. Cash's heart sank. The man stepped toward the shelter, scanner held high. Sir, there's definitely something else in there. Stand down, Reeves, Torres ordered, but his expression had hardened. Cash, is there something you're not telling us? Before Cash could answer, Efiera emerged from the shelter. Even wrapped in human thermal gear, her blue skin and golden eyes were unmistakably alien. The rescue team immediately raised their weapons. Don't shoot. Cash stepped between them and Efiera. She's not a threat. She saved my life. Step away from the hostel, Dr. Cash, Torres commanded. That's a direct order. She's not hostile. Cash insisted, but Reeves was already moving, stunner raised. The weapon discharged with a sharp whine. Efiera cried out, collapsing to her knees in the snow. The thermal regulator flickered and died, its delicate circuits fried by the stunner's electromagnetic pulse. No. Cash lunged forward, catching Efiera as she fell. Already, he could see her lips beginning to turn that dangerous shade of blue. Without the regulator, she had minutes before hypothermia set in. Secure the alien, Torres ordered. Prep it for transport. This is the discovery of the century. You're killing her. Cash shouted, cradling Efiera's trembling form. She can't survive your holding cells. She needs heat, specific heat patterns. Then you'll have plenty of motivation to keep her alive during the trip to the research station, Torres replied coldly. You're both coming with us. The xenobiology department will want to debrief you thoroughly. As the rescue team loaded Efiera's unconscious form into a containment pod, Cash felt a rage building inside him unlike anything he'd ever experienced. These were his people, his colleagues, and they were treating a sentient being like a laboratory specimen. He thought of Efiera's golden eyes, the wonder in her voice when she felt real warmth for the first time, the trust she'd placed in him when she revealed the painful truth of her banishment. Now that trust lay shattered in the snow, and it was his fault. The shuttle lifted off, carrying them away from Vidia's surface toward an uncertain fate. But as Cash watched the frozen landscape recede below, he was already planning. He'd gotten Efiera into this situation, somehow, he was going to get her out of it. Even if it meant defying everything he'd once believed about human exploration and scientific progress. Escape and revelation. The research station's medical bay hummed with activity as Dr. Sarah Chen, the station's xenobiologist, ran her preliminary scans on Efiera. Cash stood behind a security barrier, watching helplessly as they treated his friend like a laboratory specimen. Fascinating, Chen murmured, studying the readouts. Her cellular structure suggests adaptation to extreme cold, but her current condition indicates thermal dysregulation. How is that possible? Because she's not defective, Cash said through gritted teeth. She's a genetic throwback to her species' origins. They weren't always ice-adapted. Station Commander Williams turned to him with interest. Explain. Cash reluctantly shared his findings, watching as Williams's eyes lit up with the implications. A pre-adaptation genome intact after centuries of evolution. Do you realize what this means for our understanding of forced evolutionary pressure? I realize it means you're planning to keep her here indefinitely, Cash replied coldly. For study, yes. This could revolutionize our approach to terraforming. If we can understand how her people adapted to Vidia, we might be able to accelerate human adaptation to hostile worlds. Efiera stirred on the examination table, golden eyes opening to focus on Cash through the barrier. Even sedated, he could see fear and betrayal in her gaze. The trust they'd built on Vidia's surface was gone, shattered the moment he'd activated that beacon. "She's conscious," Chen reported. Heart rate elevated, stress hormone spiking. "The subject appears to recognize Dr. Cash." "Subject," Cash repeated bitterly. "Her name is Fiera." That night, Cash waited until the station's skeleton crew had settled into their routines. Security around the medical bay was tight, but he knew the station's layout better than anyone. He'd helped design some of its systems during his graduate work. Using his access codes, he made his way through maintenance corridors to the medical bay's secondary entrance. The thermal regulator he'd jury-rigged from spare parts felt inadequate in his hands, a poor replacement for the sophisticated device they'd lost, but it would have to do. Fiera was awake when he entered, her restraints keeping her immobilized on the examination table. The diamond marking between her brows pulsed weakly, her skin taking on that dangerous blue tinge again. "You came," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm getting you out of here," Cash said, working quickly to release her restraints. "I'm sorry, Fiera. I should never have called for rescue. Where will we go?" "Your people will follow." Cash helped her sit up, immediately placing the makeshift thermal regulator against her throat. The device activated with a soft hum, and some color returned to her cheeks. "There's an escape pod in Bay 7. I've programmed it to take us back to Vidia." "Back to the cold? Back to exile?" "No," Cash said firmly, supporting her as they moved toward the door. "Back to your people. It's time they learned the truth about what you really are." The journey through the station's corridors was tense, every shadow potentially concealing security personnel. But Cash's knowledge of the maintenance routes served them well, and within 20 minutes they reached the escape pod bay. "Cash, wait," Fiera caught his arm as he began the pod's launch sequence. "Why are you doing this? You're giving up everything, your career, your people." He paused, looking into her golden eyes. "Because some discoveries are too important to be locked away in laboratories. Because you trusted me, and I failed you. And because—" He struggled for the words. "Because in 2 days, you taught me more about courage and dignity than years of academic study ever did." Fiera's hand found his, her fingers intertwining with his own. "Your warmth," she said softly. "It was never just the machines, was it?" Before Cash could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Red lights flashed in the pod bay as Commander Williams's voice echoed over the intercom, "Security breach in medical bay. All personnel, the alien subject has escaped. Lock down all shuttle bays immediately." "Too late," Cash muttered, slamming his hand on the launch control. The escape pod systems roared to life, breaking free of the station's docking clamps just as security teams poured into the bay. As they plummeted toward Vidia's surface, Fiera pressed close to him in the pod's cramped confines. "My people will not welcome you," she warned. "After what your kind did before. Then we'll have to change their minds," Cash replied, checking their descent trajectory. "Starting with showing them what you really are." The pod's landing was rough, setting down in a valley Cash recognized from Fiera's descriptions, neutral territory between the major clan holdings. Snow swirled around them as they emerged, but this time Cash had come prepared with proper thermal gear for the long term. "The winter camps are 2 days' walk north," Fiera said, her voice stronger now with the regulator's steady warmth. "But Cash, if they see you as a threat, then you'll have to convince them otherwise," he replied, shouldering his pack. "You're not the defective exile they cast out. You're proof of their true heritage, their strength. And that's worth more than any scientific discovery my people could make." As they began the trek across Vidia's frozen landscape, Cash realized he was no longer the same man who had crashed here a week ago. The cold that had once seemed like humanity's enemy now felt like a teacher, and the woman walking beside him had become something he'd never expected to find among the stars, home. The fire within. The Vidian winter camp rose from the ice like a crystalline city, its structures carved from the living glacier and heated by thermal vents that Efiera's people had learned to harness over generations. Guards spotted them long before they reached the perimeter, their calls echoing across the frozen valley. "Efiera the banished returns," one called out, his voice carrying a mixture of surprise and disdain. "And she brings a human parasite." Cash felt the hostility like a physical force as they approached the camp's entrance. Blue-skinned figures emerged from the ice dwellings, their golden eyes reflecting suspicion and old anger. Among them, a tall figure with elaborate scarification approached, Kelvik, the first hunter who had once been promised to Efiera. "You dare return, defective one." Kelvik's voice dripped with contempt. "And you bring the warm thieves who desecrated our sacred places?" "I bring truth," Efiera replied, her voice steady despite the circumstances. The thermal regulator at her throat pulsed with soft light, and Cash noticed several of the gathered Vidians staring at it with curiosity. "Truth about what we really are." An older figure emerged from the largest structure, Domius, the clan leader who had shown mercy by choosing banishment over execution. His aged features were marked with the deep lines of someone who had lived through the first human contact. "Explain yourself, veiled daughter," Domius commanded. "Quickly, before I let Kelvik's blade speak for our clan's honor." Cash stepped forward, removing his helmet to show his human features clearly. "My name is Cash. I'm a scientist, not a soldier. Your daughter, Efiera, she saved my life. And in doing so, she revealed something incredible about your people." "Lies," Kelvik snarled, his hand moving to the ice-forged blade at his side. "Humans speak only lies." "The genetic markers don't lie," Cash replied, pulling out his portable scanner. "Efiera's DNA holds the key to your people's true history. You weren't always adapted to this cold. Your ancestors came from a warmer world, refugees, survivors who learned to endure this ice." Murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd. Domius raised a hand for silence. "Even if this were true, what does it matter? We are what we are. This 1 inch, he gestured dismissively at Efiera, cannot survive our world. She is weakness made flesh." "She's not weakness," Cash said firmly. "She's memory. She's what your people were before you had to change. And with the right technology." He gestured to the thermal regulator at Efiera's throat. "She's what you could be again." Efiera stepped forward, the device's glow seeming to intensify in the twilight. "I have felt true warmth, my people. Not just survival, but comfort. Joy. The fire that our ancestors knew." She looked directly at Kelvik. "You called me defective because I couldn't generate enough internal heat. But what if the defect isn't in me, what if it's in all of us? What if we settled for endurance when we could have thrived?" "Blasphemy," Kelvik growled, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. "Test me," Efiera challenged. "Test my strength now, with the warmth the human gave me. See if I am still the weak exile you cast out." The challenge hung in the frozen air. By tradition, Kelvik could not refuse without losing face before the clan. He drew his blade, the crystalline edge gleaming with inner light. Cash started to intervene, but Efiera caught his arm. "This is my fight," she said softly. "Trust me." The duel was swift and brutal. Kelvik struck with the confidence of someone who had never lost, but Efiera moved with newfound strength and speed. The thermal regulator didn't just warm her, it had awakened something that had always been there, dormant but unbroken. She flowed around Kelvik's attacks like water, her own movements precise and deadly. When it ended, Kelvik lay in the snow, Efiera's commandeered blade at his throat. She had not killed him, but the message was clear. She was no longer the weak exile they remembered. "Impossible," Domius whispered. "Not impossible," Cash said, his voice carrying across the silent camp. "Evolution. Adaptation. Your people survive by changing, but that doesn't mean the change has to be permanent. With the right technology, the right understanding, you could reclaim what your ancestors lost. Fiera helped Kelvik to his feet, her expression compassionate rather than triumphant. The human warmth machines don't steal heat, she told him. They create it. They could teach us to be warm again, truly warm. Over the following hours, as word spread through the camp, Cash found himself surrounded by curious Vidians eager to understand the technology that had transformed their rejected daughter. He shared what knowledge he could, demonstrating the thermal regulator's principles while carefully avoiding anything that could be weaponized. Your people will come looking for you, Domius observed as they sat around a thermal vent, the clan leaders listening intently to Cash's explanations. Probably, Cash admitted. But they'll find something they didn't expect, evidence that peaceful contact is possible. That we can learn from each other instead of just taking. Fiera moved to sit beside him, her proximity a comfort in the alien environment. You gave up your world for mine, she said quietly. I found something better, Cash replied, meeting her golden gaze. I found where I belong. 3 months later, when the first human diplomatic mission arrived at Vidia, they found a changed world. The ice cities now glowed with hybrid technology, human thermal generation married to Vidian engineering. The people moved with new confidence, no longer merely surviving but beginning to thrive. And in the warmest dwelling of all, they found the human scientist who had started it all, working alongside his partner to design new technologies that honored both species' strengths. The woman beside him no longer bore the title of exile, she was Fiera the Bridgewalker, translator between worlds, teacher of the new ways. When the diplomatic team asked Cash if he wanted to return to human space, he simply smiled and shook his head. He had learned something important among the ice and stars, that sometimes the greatest discoveries aren't made in laboratories or universities, but in the quiet moments when one person chooses to light a fire for another. The flame that had started in a crashed ship's emergency shelter now burned across an entire world, proving that warmth shared freely grows stronger, not weaker. And in that light, two species began to see each other not as enemies or specimens, but as what they had always been, neighbors among the stars, each carrying gifts the other needed. Cash took Fiera's hand, feeling her pulse strong and steady beneath skin that was no longer blue with cold. Around them, their world hummed with new life, new hope, new warmth. The end.